appearance day of our grandfather or great-grandfather, spiritual master, or future relative, if we're not yet initiated. So please bless me that I can say something to inspire you all about this wonderful personality, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, Prabhupada. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjanaya Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjanaya Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paridavajakacharya Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Glories to Sri Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, he glorified his spiritual master regularly on his appearance day and disappearance day. Here we have, which is a poem which he offered. It said he wrote the following poem in February 1935. Okay, so he must have offered it at that Vyasa Puja celebration. And then, along with that prayer, 1935, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, he disappeared early morning on the first day of 1937. So this is Srila Prabhupada glorifying his spiritual master at the end of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura's manifest pastimes. So I thought the most apt, the most direct connection that any of us ever have with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura is through the eyes, the vision, the love of his foremost disciple. So I'll read this poem just as a way of demonstrating how connected Srila Prabhupada was with his spiritual master. On one of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura's appearance or disappearance days, Srila Prabhupada personally cooked his spiritual master's favourite preparation for him. There was going to be a feast. The devotees were on a holiday, having a festival day, so they had a lot of different preparations, and the prep that Srila Prabhupada cooked was Daka Khichdi, which is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That was one of his favourite preps. And it was a khichdi cooked with urad dal, and it was cooked very creamy and some vegetables. So Srila Prabhupada prepared that, and it was offered to his spiritual master. And the devotees were in a happy mood. They're all coming together to celebrate a festival. Festival means some glorification, some worship, Pushpanjali, and afterwards a feast. So they celebrated and the feast came, and they took the different preparations, and then the khichdi was part of the meal. It was cold by that time, but the devotees they almost simultaneously they honoured that prasadam, and then there was this silence, this peace that pervaded the whole, because they were raucous people, and everybody was just astounded by how much love and taste was saturated in that Mahaprasadam. This is something that we should all aim to experience, that Mahaprasadam. Prasadam's been prepared with so much love. So Srila Prabhupada practically demonstrated, and he just not only in his cooking, but in his adoption of the principles that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was pushing, was espousing. And here we can see evidence, the same mood. He picked up on the essence of his spiritual master and the glory of his spiritual master, and he put it down with his pen in this wonderful poem. The poem is entitled Adore Ye All the Happy Day. It's in the front part of all of the Vyasa Puja books. Just here it says, the following version of the poem was prepared from two sources. The version Srila Prabhupada included in the March 1952 edition of his Back to Godhead magazine, and the version he wrote by hand on the back of a letter he sent Roy Ramdas on March the 20th, 1969. I just read one version here, so maybe verse 1. Adore ye all the happy day, blessed than heaven, sweeter than May, when he appeared at Puri, the holy place, my Lord and Master, his divine grace. 2. O my Master, the evangelic angel, give us thy light, light up thy candle. Struggle for existence, a human race, the only hope, your divine grace. 3. Misled we are, all going astray. Save us, Lord, our fervent pray. Wonder thy ways, to turn our face, adore thy feet, your divine grace. 4. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls, paying most heavy the illusion's toll. Darkness around, all distress, the only hope, your divine grace. 5. Message of service thou hast brought, a meaningful life, as Chaitanya wrought. Unknown to all, it's full of grace. That's your gift, your divine grace. A meaningful life. In this version, let me just check. A healthful life. A healthful life, and I understood that refers to the life on the farms, to the life connected with the cows and service like that. So here it's been changed to a meaningful life, as Chaitanya wrought. Thou hast brought a meaningful life. So in terms of, it's a practical life. A practical life. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, when he was preaching, then Gaudiya Vaishnavism in general, spiritualism, had fallen into a big ditch in the public eye, become categorized as a sentimental means to make a livelihood, not genuine religious sentiment. One of the thrust of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mood and manner was that he showed how asceticism can be brought into bhakti, and how to give actual proper religiousness with practical behaviour and character, and also religious credit, not just superficial religion, by practical demonstration, practical life, this meaningful, healthful life that he brought. Unknown to all, Prabhupada said, unknown to all. It's full of grace to renounce the world, to be interested in, to renounce the material world, the trappings of material sense gratification and opulence. And so that's some of the elements of that life. 6. Absolute is sentient. Thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity thou hast removed. Here again it says removed. So maybe that's a closer. Thou hast moved is in an earlier translation. So thou hast removed. Impersonal calamity thou hast removed. Yeah, moving. It's not completely gone. It's we're in the grips of impersonal propaganda. This gives a life, a new and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. 7. Had you not come, who had told the message of Krishna, forceful and bold? That's your right. You have the mace. Save me a fallen, your divine grace. 8. The line of service as drawn by you is pleasing and healthy, like morning dew. The oldest of all, but in new dress. Miracle done, your divine grace. as I started off saying, none of us have ever met our great-grandfather, our grandfather, spiritual master. So the only way to know him is through the recollections, the writings, the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura that have been preserved and passed on. It's impossible to even understand a pure devotee. Vaishnavera kriya mudra vigyaya na bujai. Vaishnavera kriya mudra, the behavior and even the gestures of a pure devotee are impossible to understand. So we have to get a glimpse into the what was perceived by their followers. We know the history, we can see what's documented. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, he was born in the family of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur had 13 children. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the third child. His eldest brother was named Achyutananda. There's one remembrance or pastime where Achyutananda was ailing, was having problems, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, due to his spiritual prowess, his depth of bhakti, he managed to cure his brother, managed to relieve his brother from those sufferings. The mood of his father before he appeared, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had taken on the mission in life to renovate, to bring back into a respectable position the understanding of the Vaishnava philosophy, the Vaishnava Siddhanta. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in order to put into practice his desire, he was searching everywhere for a copy of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He heard about this wonderful biography of Lord Chaitanya, but there were none available. They'd gone out of print. That they weren't much in print at those days. It was they would be hand copied. There were expert scribes who would be paid to just sit and write a book. So eventually, after a great search, he found a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he was able to expound the wonders, the glories of Lord Chaitanya. So he perceived that it was a monumental task to rescue this dismal world from the darkness of impersonal calamity, of watering down the original pristine pure philosophy of Krishna Bhakti, devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so he was praying, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was praying for some assistance from the Lord's entourage. He wanted the Supreme Personality of God to send one of his men, one of his representatives. So eventually Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was conceived, he appeared, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur understood that he was the answer to those prayers. He was that ray of Vishnu who would be powerful enough to turn back the tide of the impersonal material world. That was verified in many ways. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati thought when he appeared, he had the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck and draped across his chest like a natural Brahman thread. When Krishna appears, his lotus feet have got all these auspicious markings. You can see the dust of his footprints. There's the elephant goad, the lotus flower, the barley corn, the lamp, there's the fish, all of these auspicious signs. I thought I had a fish on my hand at one stage, but it was just a scar. So there's auspicious signs that, and the sages, they can recognize through the art of physiognomy these characteristics of great souls. And the devotees, often they come and they have a particular appearance, but after engaging devotional service, then they develop this moon-like face. They change. Their eyes become elongated. Because their subtle body has changed. We've changed bodies when we've started to engage in devotional service. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, natural Brahmin thread. At the age of 6 months, the Thakur, his father, was living in Jagannath Puri. Rath Yatra festival started, and the Rath cart was coming past the home of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and as Rath Yatra processions do, they move by the will of the Lord. So the cart stopped directly in front of the house and wouldn't move. They brought elephants, and at one stage in the original Rath Yatra carts with Lord Chaitanya, the cart wouldn't move. So sometimes Lord Chaitanya would have, and Lord Jagannath, he was waiting for Lord Chaitanya so he could see him to move, to be satisfied. So Lord Chaitanya was there dancing in a particular party. He'd come to the front of the cart wouldn't move. So sometimes he would go to the back of the cart, and Lord Chaitanya would put his head against the cart, and the cart would start moving. So the cart wouldn't move. Bhaktivinoda Thakur indicated to his wife to take the young infant, take the opportunity now, go up onto the cart, get the blessings. So she took Bimal Prasad, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, a young baby, up onto the cart, and some descriptions say threw him at the feet of Lord Jagannath, but another description is probably placed him down towards the feet of the deity. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, as a young baby, naturally crawled towards the deity. And instantly, well, not necessarily instantly, but a garland fell off the deity and landed on the child. And they picked up the garland, and everybody took that as a sign, blessed by Lord Jagannath. By the age of 7, he had memorized and could recite off by heart the whole Bhagavad Gita. Very soon after that, he took up service in the printing house, in the publishing house of his spiritual master, Bhaktivinoda, not his spiritual master, his father. He would edit the magazine, the Sajjan Toshani, and proofreading. Another demonstration of his character. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Vaishnava, said that if one performs yoga practice for a short time but is unsuccessful, in their next life they will take birth in an aristocratic family. If one performs yoga, devotional service practice like that for a long time, but unsuccessful, in their next life they will take birth in a family of Vaishnavas. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada both took birth in a family of Vaishnavas. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, house, deities, boga, everything set up. There were mangoes, just bought, fresh mangoes. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, a young child, 4 years old, was running around. It was his habit to be in an opulent place where there's plenty prasadam. So he ran past the mangoes, or he saw the mangoes, and he ate all the mangoes. They weren't offered. Bhaktivinoda Thakur came, he was going to do the puja. Where's the mangoes? And he discovered mango juice all over his son. He discovered, okay. He chastised him, he admonished him. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur immediately, 4 years old, collected himself and took a vow, I will never eat mangoes again. And he observed that throughout his life. Although if people brought him a green mango chutney, that was one of his favourites as well, he would take that in a plentiful way. Once he was, in his older days, he was travelling on a train with several disciples. Somebody had offered him some mangoes. And his disciples kept those mangoes in a bag, and they'd been travelling for some time. After a couple of days, the mangoes were overripe. So Prabhupada, when he was travelling with his disciples, they'd have mock debates. They'd engage, I'll be the Mayavadi, you be the Vaishnava, and then they would challenge each other. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was also in that mood and practically demonstrate the philosophy. So they understood that in another compartment there was this big Mayavadi guru. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, okay, he's proclaiming it's all one. So take him these mangoes and offer him this prasadam, rotten mangoes. And so if he's going to live up to his philosophy, offer him the prasadam. So the disciples, they took him, the Mayavadi guru, they took him the mangoes, and the Swami, living up to his philosophy, started taking the mangoes, eating the mangoes. He ate 4 mangoes, and then he came and surrendered to the lotus feet of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Took Mahaprasadam and then realised the folly of his adherence to that philosophy. Back to some history. The scholars, they identify that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, there were 3 main periods in his life. His early periods, the first section of his life was as a student. 26 years. He was studying mainly his father's books, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's books, but that didn't, and he was absorbed in those books, but he still was excelling in his normal academic studies. He had what's called an eidectic memory. It's not actually a what's that?
Photographic?
Not a photographic memory. Something similar, that he could recall what he saw in front of him for a few minutes, so he could see it. Another part of after his education, he didn't want to get involved in developing a career. He didn't want to be directed towards getting married, so he took a renounced position. He got a position. He went somehow or other through connections. He managed to become involved in the court of the king of Bharatpur, and he became the Raj Pandit. He was educating the students, the sons, the aristocracy in the higher principles of life and introducing them to bhakti. While he was there, he had access to the library, the king's library, and he systematically studied all the books in the library. At that stage, he got a reputation as a walking encyclopedia. You could ask him anything about anything, and he could state a reference and give you direction towards those things. He renounced his studies of astronomy. He mastered the art of astronomy. That's where he initially got his title, Saraswati. Saraswati, the goddess of learning. He was so blessed by her that he understood the principles of astronomy. Just like now we've got the Prabhupada's Temple of Vedic Planetarium. There are so many people who are trying to get their brains around that 5th canto and understand how the whole thing works. Somehow or other our Antadvaita Prabhu is blessed with a particular insight into that and is giving advice on how this universe is structured and how it works, how it goes together. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati for astronomical expertise. The astrologers, they use, there's 2 parts, there's astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is the movement of the planets and the stars and the calculations. They can tell you when there's going to be an eclipse, when there's going to be an auspicious time. Then there's predictive astrology, where people say, well, actually this is something you should do with your life, and if you do this, then this will happen, or actually you're destined in your life to have 3 marriages. So if you want to, and so 2 will be unsuccessful, so there's a little technique. Some things, there's an inauspicious star, you get a gem. I got a sun and a moon amulet once, and they kept on getting stuck in the Brahmin thread, so I said, I don't want those. And so the astrologer gave me mantras. Oh, they're much nicer. You can propitiate those planets with mantras. So if you have it in your stars that you're going to get married 3 times, then there's another little adjustment you can make. You marry a banana tree. You have a wedding ceremony, and the banana tree is your betrothed, and you go through the whole ceremony, and that's one. Or you're going to lose a lot of money, you're going to gain a lot of money. So give it away voluntarily. Don't feel so much distress. There's ways of adjusting. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was expert in all of those different things, but he realized that they were mundane. Often nowadays we're advised, okay, astrology, pay some attention to it, but don't take it as the be-all and end-all. There's all these different planets which are influencing us, but you have to leave room for the Krishna Graha, the Krishna planet. He can override all of those things. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he put that aside. He didn't follow up that avenue of teaching. Then from 1901 until 1918, this period is labelled as the aesthetic period. 18 years. For 9 of those 18 years, he took a vow to chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra. At least 300,000 names, which equals 192 rounds per day. His overall vow was to chant 1 billion names. And that took him 9 years. So chanting all day, not worrying about his residence, his food. At the same time, Haridas Thakur, he was also chanting so many rounds per day. Able to preach, to meet guests, and I've seen devotees who have taken vows to chant 64 rounds a day. And they're involved in preaching, but they've got their bead bag as well, and they're chanting while they're involved in some activity, hearing what's going on, and so all day long chanting. If you want to chant so many rounds, then you have to up your speed a little bit, and you to really keep your focus together. But it's possible, just to be absorbed so intently. So as a result of that intense absorption, he changed the configuration of the universe. He purified himself, purified his surroundings. There's a story of one of his disciples in Calcutta, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had positioned himself in Mayapur on the bank of the Ganges. In Calcutta, some other Vaishnavas, they sensed that it was a time to start a preaching mission, to get moving forward. So they were looking for a leader, and somebody described there's a great saintly person. So he came to visit, and then he asked around, is there such a person who fits that description? And they said, no, we don't know of anybody like that. There's only this madman who's living out there. So this devotee went to find him, and he came across Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he tried to communicate with him. But he wouldn't take anything. He'd come to Calcutta, what are you talking about? Can't you see here's Radha and Krishna's pastimes going on? This is Krishna is manifest. This is he was just incommunicado in relationship to the material world. So that person went back to Calcutta and put his plans aside for a while. Then one day, a couple of years later, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur turned up, shaven up with a danda at his door and said, okay, now's the time to get down to work. And he began his Gaudiya Math mission. He started his first centre in 1918. That's at the end of that ascetic period. In Ultadanga. Ultadanga is It's a suburb, outer suburb of Calcutta. When you're coming into Calcutta on the train from Krishnanagar or from Navadvip, I can't remember which one. You ever travel on the train? No. Ultadanga, it's the, you get just before Calcutta, there's the Dum Dum stop. That's where the airport is. And then the next stop is Ultadanga. It's got another name as well. Howrah is the next one after that. So Howrah or Shelda. Shelda is the last station. Then the next stop is Ultadanga. Krishnanagar, yeah, the Krishnanagar train. Yeah, thank you. We have a train traveller amongst us. It's actually a wonderful way to travel around India. Entertaining, quite peaceful, less stress. You're sitting in a taxi and no, not the way to go. Train is very, very good way to travel. Ultadanga, we got off at that station quite a few times. It's not quite as bad as getting on and off a train in Japan, but you've got to squeeze to the door, you've got to make preparation a couple of stops beforehand, and you get expelled from the train. But then once you're off, then Ultadanga is the closest train stop to Salt Lake, which is a nice suburb there in Calcutta. So this original temple in Ultadanga, 19, sorry for the digressions, the little, present day guided tour. We also visited the Bag Bazaar temple, which is a famous temple that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura established. He established it. It's very prestigious. It's very well decorated. Not so much nowadays. It's become run down. Hasn't been maintained properly. Once we were in Calcutta and we didn't have anywhere to stay, so somebody suggested, and so we stayed overnight in that temple. They gave us accommodation. We asked for some prasadam and they said, okay, just now coming. So at around about 9:30 at night, the residents took some prasadam. We were able to take some prasadam with them. That was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura's practice, to take evening meal, just a light evening meal about 9:30. And then Mangalarti the next morning went for about an hour and a half. They have all the preliminaries, and then Mangalarti is quite an expanded thing. Just like if you ever hear a Gaudiya Vaishnav sannyasi, when they're sitting down to give their talk, they don't just sing Jai Radha Madhava. They have like a 10-minute preamble with all of the mantras and the prayers. So it's very, very elaborate, very in-depth sadhana, and very austere followers. So he had these different, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, he had these different centres which he started. Eventually he started up, it was started up under his direction, under his auspices, 64 different mutts all over India. In his later period, from 1918 to 1937, it was known as his missionary period. And the main precepts that he was putting into practice, they were based, or they were expounded in the letter, 1926 letter, which had the seminal practices for his mission were: number one, varnashram, to establish varnashram, birth not by caste, birth by qualification, because at that time then the brahmanas were claiming that they had the rights to perform religious duties, religious rituals for people, to guide people. But smarter brahmanas, they didn't, not many of them had the aspects of the truth, the essence of the truth. They were caught up in the rituals. And the main business was to get some money to get some chapatis together. They used to offer the deity, show the deity, and expect some dakshin, some money in the hundi. There's one statement in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Minikatam Ramdas, he was such a great devotee. Sometimes devotees would be paying their obeisances and he'd climb up on their back and beat them with his stick, with his flute. But other times he'd go into the temple and he'd pay his obeisances to the deities. And if they were not real deities, if the shalagrams on the altar were just stones, imitation, they would crack. He would expose them. So varnashram, to expose the the wrongdoings of this caste. The next heading, number 2, is the upper sampradayas. Again, it's been classified that in the so-called Vaishnava tradition there are 13 upper sampradayas. The Owls, the Bals, the Gauranga Nagaris, the Dardavesh, the Smartas, the Jatagosani. There's a list of 30, and they have very specific modes of behaviour. The Gauranga Nagaris, the men dress as women, trying to get the mood of the gopi, and they engage in pastimes and trying to follow Lord Chaitanya by that bogus practice. One of the fun things you see on the trains when you're travelling is men with beards dressed in saris, and they flirt with the passengers in the mood of trying to get them to get some money out of them, so they'll get off their lap and leave them alone. We saw them quite a few times. They'd cast their glance at us, but they sort of they kept away, kept the distance. The Owls and the Bals. There's a description of some Bals who came to America in the early days, and they visited the temple, and Mukunda Maharaj, he was there. They came in, they looked like Lord Chaitanya. They had beautiful long locks and saffron clothes, but the leader was carrying a little poodle. And he said, they said, no, he's okay, just don't put him down, don't let him do his business. And they came back another time and they gave a couple of devotees a ticket to their concert. So I think Maharaj went along to the concert. There was a group accompanying them, the Moody Blues or something like that, and they left before the Bals did their performance. And one time there was Janmashtami, or one of the celebrations, Prabhupada was not there, so the Bal, they came and they were engaged in the kirtan, and then the kirtan became ecstatic and they started swinging around. Everybody they were watching them. They were very graceful, practiced dancers. And then when the kirtan stopped, the Bal follower fell on the ground and laid there, so he was stunned. And so the devotees didn't know what to do. They left. Other people came along and they thought, oh, this is something special, this is really spiritual. And they asked Prabhupada, what should we have done? Prabhupada said, kick him in the head. Offer boots to their faces. And if they're really, then they won't notice. But otherwise they'll get offended. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, one of the verses in that poem said, you have the mace. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, he was known as the lion guru, ferocious. Mayavadis, people who had the wrong philosophy, they were frightened of him. They'd see him coming down the street and they'd cross to the other side, try and escape. This is an experience that quite a few devotees had on the streets of Australia. They'd be walking through the main shopping centre and they'd see a devotee and they'd cross the street to try and get away with them because they had the experience of being shaken down. Across the street there was another devotee, so they'd have to dodge about 6 devotees. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Prabhupada said he had that same mood. He was preaching with the Bhagavatam in one hand and a club in the other hand. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that was one of the thrusts of his movement. He would point out the actual truth and he would very clearly describe the deviations. He would undermine their footing. He would expose and critique all the things that were wrong. Just because people they get bewildered. Oh, it's okay to wear this Radhakund tilak. If you haven't got any other tilak, it's better to have tilak, but it's not the preferred. The preferred tilak is the Udva Pundra that we wear. And the big Sikha, this is not strictly our sampradaya. So little things are pointed out. And just to refine, to keep our practices on target. Next, one of his seminal practices was the parikram, the Navadvip Mandal parikram. Just like here on New Govardhana, Mahamantra Prabhu has established the foundation of a parikram path with the places of holy places to visit there. that can be developed. And I think he's got plans that Chakratirtha, that has got this new stupa and everything on it. So that was developed, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he made incredible displays, the dioramas, the theistic doll dioramas. Sometimes they would stretch for a kilometre. You'd stand in front of one, we used to have one of those, the changing bodies diorama. The baby, the young child, the youth, the adult, the middle-aged man, and the man who's died, like a doll. And in more sophisticated dioramas, I think even in Indian time, they would have a little light representing the soul. So the light would travel from one body to the next. I saw the effect of those. We were at the Mind Body Spirit Festival, and we had one diorama set up, and people would just see, oh yeah, that's interesting, a lot of dolls. But some people would stop, they'd become shaken, they'd become stunned, because after the older, the man dying, then there'd be another body, and the soul would travel further onto those. And there was another diorama which was used very often within ISKCON, is the man and the bull. The bull is tied down, and the man is there with an axe ready to slaughter the bull. But then if you look closely, the bull has a man's head and the man has a cow's head. You kill animals, in the next life you'll be killed. And a lot of these animals which have taken birth in the species of cow which is going to be killed are men who have killed a lot of cows. So very, very powerful way of preaching. Number 4 was Mayapur Seva, service to the Dham, Mayapur, to expand the glories, to clean up the Dham, to fill the Dham with pure-hearted Vaishnavas. The new temple of Vedic Planetarium, the Pujari floor is 1.5 acres. It requires 200 full-time pujaris in order to staff that facility. So they're getting the structure together now to develop that seva to the Dham. Then they have to train, to cultivate, to prepare the pujaris who are of the proper mentality. Janani Prabhu, he's got a team of very dedicated pujaris who assist him, and we often go, or we would go, and we would say we want to request some blessings. We would go, we say we want Jananivas or Pankajani Prabhu to directly offer these things to the deity. So nowadays you just have confidence that the other Vaishnavas, they're not as pure-hearted, but they have the same mood, they can fulfill the same practices. So to develop Mayapur Seva means to train ourselves up to become proper devotees. This is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. This is the thrust of his movement. Number 5, a Vidyapit in Mayapur, centre of learning. A university has been scheduled in Mayapur, so we have to have places of learning. A Vidyapit. Vidyapit. Pit is a place where you sit and you cultivate knowledge. So to be able to systematically study these literatures, and it's not even systematically study in depth, but just to apply yourself for some time, to go through a samskara of just exposing yourself to these texts, and then in due course of time, without understanding them in the beginning, it just rubs off, it sinks in. You become absorbed in the culture. One of our teachers in Mayapur, he described that he'd heard from a Greek professor. He was teaching Greek culture, Greek language. His students, after doing half a dozen classes, suddenly wanted to experience some of the sacrifices that were presented in that Greek language. That just the language itself contains that culture. Sanskrit contains the language of the demigods, the family life of the demigods, the principles of the demigods. So just becoming steeped or absorbed, or and then after some time expert in these texts is enough to fulfill lifetimes of desires. Poetics. I heard a nice poetic description. Because we don't have access to the absolute truth. We through anything, our mundane senses, they're imperfect. Our brains are like little peas. They're really deficient. So a good poet, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he describes in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, what is the use of a poet's words unless they enter the heart and cause the head to spin like an arrow. It's supposed to reach. So a poet's words they're supposed to evoke an image. Poetry is not just rhyme. Poetry has to have echoes. So Sandesh. What do you think of when you hear the word Sandesh? Ice cream tasting sweets with pistachio and apricots. But Sandishta means a message. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he heard about Uddhava going to visit the residents of Vrindavan to deliver a message, Sandishta. There's a subtle implication, there's a meaning there of Sandesh that message is full. Krishna sent the message. He's the source of the Vedas. He knows more than what's actually in the Vedas. It's a subtle implication. So the beautiful piece of poetry that I heard was, it was holy season, the festival where you throw colours around. So Krishna wanted Radharani to come and play. She was in a pool at the time. She didn't want to comply with Krishna, that man, she was angry. So everybody was trying to encourage her. Her girlfriend said, come on, Krishna's here, and give up, it's time to play holy. So eventually Krishna turned up and he called her. And all of her anger melted. And she came out of the palace. The description is like a full moon traversing through a pond of lilies. So I couldn't imagine the Queen of Vrindavan, how she moves, but that image of the beautiful full moon traversing through a pond of lilies, it creates an image, and it's beautiful, it's regal, it's very exciting. So this is one of the benefits of becoming absorbed in the scriptures. Knowledge will come, realization will come. And the final point, seminal practice of the spiritual movement, which is now manifest in the ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura said, never chase money. Never chase money. Money will come. Preach, and all the facilities you need will be provided. Never chase money. In fact, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when he started his movement, he didn't want to touch money. Principle of sannyasi, don't touch money. So he had a manager, Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari was very astute, good business person, and he was the main manager. Unfortunately, he didn't pick up the pristine principles of properly following his spiritual master. He and another of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's principal disciples, Ananta Vasudev, they formed two factions, or they were the heads of two factions. The Gaudiya Math split into factions, and they're still in court for 40, 50 years to decide who's the actual Acharya. Srila Prabhupada was able to prevent that from happening by following the order of his spiritual master to instigate the GBC, the Governing Body Commission. And that is a system of checks and balances where there's 35 leading disciples, and they as a collective group, they represent the will of the Acharya. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he, towards the end of his life, after establishing in a phenomenal way if you want to hear about how effective, how phenomenal Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, I can recommend a class given here in New Govardhana by Her Grace Sitala Mataji. She spoke for 2 or 3 hours about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and she painted the surrounding environment that he was preaching in and how prolific he was. Jiva Goswami was also a prolific preacher, and one of his thrusts was institutionalization, organization, making it more systematic. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was disappointed in some of his followers. So he told Srila Prabhupada, they were walking together at Radhakund, if you ever get money, print books. And I would prefer to rip the marble off the walls of that fancy temple in Bug Bazaar and get the money from that marble and use it to print books. Because in the temple, the devotees were just squabbling over which room they could occupy. This is a better facility, I need this, I'm more senior, I should have this facility. Rather than keeping focused on the need to give Krishna consciousness, to spread Krishna consciousness, to assist people